July 28, 1943. Rechlin Airfield, Nazi Germany. Oberst Egon Aschenbrenner's face was ashen as he descended the metal ladder from the captured B-17 flying fortress. His leather flight jacket was dark with sweat, despite the cool morning, and his hands trembled slightly as he accepted a cigarette from a waiting aide. For several moments, the decorated Luftwaffe test pilot, a veteran of over 100 combat missions and recipient of the Knight's Cross, said nothing, drawing deeply on the cigarette as he stared back at the massive American bomber that now wore the black crosses of the German Air Force. "So?" prompted General Major Wolfgang Vorwald, head of the Luftwaffe Technical Division, who had been waiting impatiently for the test flight to conclude. "What is your assessment?" Aschenbrenner removed his flight cap, wiped perspiration from his forehead, and looked directly at his superior. "If our fighters must face more than 3 of these aircraft in formation," he said quietly, "they have almost no chance of survival. The defensive firepower is unlike anything we have encountered. Now I understand why our pilots are dying." This moment, captured in the classified test flight report filed later that day, marked a profound turning point in the air war over Europe. For the previous 9 months, waves of American B-17 bombers had been striking targets in Nazi-occupied territories, gradually pushing deeper into the Reich itself. The Luftwaffe had initially dismissed these raids as costly American follies, confident that their fighter force could decimate the lumbering bombers. By mid-1943, however, German fighter losses were mounting at an unsustainable rate, with experienced pilots being shot down in shocking numbers. The mystery of the American bombers' effectiveness would finally be answered through a comprehensive German evaluation program using captured aircraft, an initiative that would reveal not just the technical capabilities of America's airborne arsenal, but the staggering industrial capacity that made it possible. What Aschenbrenner and his fellow test pilots discovered during those flights would fundamentally alter German air defense strategy and reveal the mathematical certainty of Germany's ultimate defeat. The story of how the Luftwaffe acquired and tested captured B-17 bombers reveals both the desperation and thoroughness of German intelligence efforts as the air war intensified. By early 1943, the increasing American bombing campaign was causing serious disruption to German war production and civilian morale. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe, demanded explanations for why his once-vaunted fighter force was failing to stem the American air offensive. "I was promised that American daylight bombing would be suicide for the attackers," Göring reportedly shouted during a January 1943 staff meeting. "Instead, our fighters are suffering losses at 3 times the rate we can replace pilots. There must be something we are missing about these bombers." The task of solving this mystery fell to the secretive Luftwaffe unit Kampfgeschwader 200, KG 200, commanded by Oberst Theodor Rowehl. This specialized group was responsible for evaluating captured enemy aircraft and developing countermeasures. While several damaged B-17s had been recovered after crash landings in occupied territories, most were too severely compromised for comprehensive testing. The breakthrough came on March 14, 1943, when a B-17F model designated Wulfe Hound from the American 91st Bomb Group made an emergency landing near Amsterdam after sustaining damage during a raid on Kiel. The bomber's condition was remarkably good. Damage limited primarily to one engine and minor control surfaces. Within 24 hours, Luftwaffe technical teams had secured the aircraft and transported it under heavy guard to the Rechlin Airfield, Germany's primary aircraft testing facility located 80 miles north of Berlin. There, a team of engineers led by Diplomatiekstudierengineers Hans Sander began a methodical evaluation of every aspect of the American bomber. The captured B-17F revealed a level of engineering and manufacturing sophistication that stunned the German technical experts. The aircraft's defensive armament included 13 Browning M2 50-caliber machine guns arranged to create overlapping fields of fire in all directions, with particularly heavy concentration protecting the vulnerable rear and lower sections. Each gun could fire up to 800 rounds per minute, with an effective range of over 1,000 yards. A B-17 in formation could bring more defensive firepower to bear than some ground-based flak batteries. The Americans have essentially created a flying fortress in the most literal sense, wrote Sander in his initial technical assessment. The defensive firepower exceeds that of 4 of our standard bombers combined. More concerning is the evident simplicity of the design, clearly optimized for mass production rather than handcrafting. Everything about this aircraft speaks to quantity production methods we cannot match. Beyond raw firepower, the B-17 incorporated numerous survivability features that German bombers lacked. Self-sealing fuel tanks that could absorb multiple bullet strikes without leaking. Extensive armor plating protecting crew positions and critical systems. Redundant hydraulic and electrical systems, and an airframe designed to absorb significant combat damage while remaining flyable. Most concerning to the German analysts was evidence that this aircraft, far from being an exceptional example, represented standard production. Factory stamps, serial numbers, and component standardization all pointed to mass production on a scale that German industry could not approach. While the Luftwaffe's primary bomber, the Heinkel He-111, required over 25,000 labor hours to construct, evidence suggested the Americans were producing each B-17 in less than half that time. After 2 months of ground testing, the captured B-17 was ready for flight evaluation. This critical phase would reveal not just how the bomber performed, but how it would respond in simulated combat conditions. Oberst Aschenbrenner, as one of the Luftwaffe's most experienced test pilots, was selected to lead these flights, accompanied by a crew of German flight engineers and defensive systems specialists. Over the course of 3 weeks in July 1943, the German test team flew 8 separate missions with the captured bomber, systematically exploring its performance envelope, defensive capabilities, and vulnerabilities. They measured its speed at different altitudes, evaluated its stability during evasive maneuvers, and, most critically, tested its defensive gun coverage using camera guns mounted on accompanying German fighters. The revelations from these test flights were profound. The B-17 demonstrated exceptional stability as a bombing platform, maintaining formation integrity even when subjected to violent evasive maneuvers. Its service ceiling of over 35,000 feet exceeded what many Luftwaffe fighters could comfortably reach. But most alarming was the demonstration of its defensive firepower. During one test on July 26th, a simulation was conducted with the captured B-17 flying in formation position while 3 Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters made controlled attack runs from different angles. Camera guns on both the bomber and the fighters recorded the encounters. When the films were analyzed, the results were sobering. From 10 different attack approaches, the bomber's guns had clear shots at the attacking fighters in 9 cases, often with multiple guns simultaneously. The concept of a safe attack angle does not exist with this aircraft, noted Hauptmann Karl Rettlinger, a Luftwaffe gunnery expert who participated in the evaluation. The Americans have created interlocking fields of fire that leave almost no approach vector undefended. When 3 or more such aircraft fly in the defensive formation we have observed, the mathematical probability of a fighter approaching without taking fire is virtually 0. It was this realization that prompted Aschenbrenner's ashen-faced assessment on July 28th after conducting the final comprehensive test flight. The report he filed that evening, marked highest secrecy, was immediately transmitted to Luftwaffe High Command and to Göring personally. It contained a stark warning. The B-17F represents a fundamental challenge to our defensive doctrine. Its combination of high-altitude capability, defensive armament, and structural resilience makes it uniquely difficult to counter with our current fighter force. Most concerning is evidence that American industry is producing these aircraft at a rate exceeding 300 units monthly and still accelerating. We are not merely facing superior technology, but overwhelming numerical superiority of that technology. The immediate consequence of Aschenbrenner's report was a summons from Göring for a high-level conference at Hall, his estate, northeast of Berlin. On August 2, 1943, Generalleutnant Adolf Galland, inspector of fighters for the Luftwaffe, arrived to find Göring in an uncharacteristically subdued mood, Aschenbrenner's report open on his desk. "So, Galland," Göring reportedly began, "it seems our fighters are attacking flying porcupines. Tell me how we are to overcome this American bomber." For the next 4 hours, Galland, Aschenbrenner, and the assembled Luftwaffe leadership engaged in a brutally honest assessment of Germany's deteriorating position in the air war. The captured B-17 had forced a moment of clarity that could not be obscured by propaganda or wishful thinking. The hard numbers painted an unambiguous picture. While Germany was producing approximately 250 single-engine fighters monthly, with production constrained by critical material shortages, the Americans were completing over 300 B-17s in the same period, with production still accelerating. Göring, initially skeptical of the report's implications, pressed Aschenbrenner directly. "Perhaps you overstate the bomber's capabilities? Our pilots have shot down hundreds of these aircraft." "Herr Reichsmarschall," Aschenbrenner replied, "for every one we shoot down, they produce 3 new ones. Their defensive formation tactics multiply the effectiveness of each aircraft. And critically, our pilot losses in these interceptions are approaching 1-to-1 with bomber losses, an exchange rate that mathematically guarantees our defeat if continued." This stark assessment initiated a fundamental revision of Luftwaffe interceptor tactics. The previous doctrine had emphasized frontal attacks on bomber formations, exploiting the perceived weakness in forward defensive armament. The captured B-17 revealed this approach to be disastrously flawed. The bomber's nose mounted 2 50-caliber machine guns with exceptional forward coverage, and the tight formation tactics employed by American bomber groups created overlapping fields of fire that made frontal attacks prohibitively dangerous. Galland immediately ordered the development of new tactics emphasizing attacks from below and to the rear, concentrating fighter formations for mass strikes rather than piecemeal engagements, and employing standoff weapons like air-to-air rockets that could be fired from beyond the effective range of the bomber's defensive guns. Most tellingly, he directed that new Luftwaffe pilots receive specific training on the B-17's defensive capabilities, using data from the captured aircraft. Tacit acknowledgement that the American bomber would remain a central threat for the foreseeable future. The most profound impact of the captured B-17 evaluation, however, extended beyond tactical adjustments to a fundamental reassessment of Germany's strategic position. The bomber's combination of technical sophistication and evident mass production efficiency forced German leadership to confront the growing material disparity between Nazi Germany and the United States. Erhard Milch, Field Marshal and Aircraft Production Chief, reviewed the Rechlin findings during an August 1943 meeting of the Reich Air Ministry. His conclusion was blunt. "We are seeing in this bomber not merely an advanced aircraft, but evidence of an industrial capability that outstrips our own by a factor of at least 5-to-1. More concerning is that this disparity is growing, not diminishing. The Americans have translated their industrial potential into actual production at a pace we did not anticipate and cannot match." This recognition represented a pivotal moment in the German war effort. the point at which key military leaders began to understand that they faced not just battlefield setbacks, but systemic industrial inferiority that no tactical brilliance could overcome. The captured B-17 had made visible the invisible, the awesome industrial might that would ultimately determine the war's outcome more decisively than any single battle or campaign. For the Luftwaffe pilots tasked with intercepting American bomber formations, the revised understanding of the B-17's capabilities came at a critical moment. The summer of 1943 saw the initiation of the combined bomber offensive, with American daylight precision bombing complemented by British night area bombing in round-the-clock pressure on German industry and infrastructure. The strategic stakes were escalating precisely as German fighters found themselves increasingly outmatched. Major Hans Philipp, a Luftwaffe ace with 206 aerial victories who had previously specialized in Eastern Front operations, transferred to the Reich Defense in mid-1943. After his first engagement against American bomber formations in August, he wrote in his diary, "The Americans fly these massive formations of heavily armed aircraft with a precision that seems impossible. When one flies through such a formation, one passes through a virtually solid wall of bullets. I lost 4 experienced pilots today to these flying fortresses. Something fundamental has changed in the air war." Philipp would himself be killed on October 8, 1943, while attacking B-17s over Bremen, a grim validation of the warnings contained in the Rechlin test reports. September 12, 1943. Evo Forest, occupied France. Dawn revealed an unusual gathering at the camouflaged airfield hidden within the dense woodland. 48 Luftwaffe fighter pilots, the elite of Jagdgeschwader 2 and Jagdgeschwader 26, stood in a semicircle around Major Egon Mayer, one of Germany's most successful bomber interceptor specialists with over 40 Allied aircraft destroyed. Before them, strikingly incongruous against the backdrop of Messerschmitt fighters, stood the captured B-17 Wulfe Hound, now temporarily relocated to France for a tactical demonstration that Generalleutnant Galland had personally ordered. The German crosses on its wings and fuselage had been freshly repainted, but the massive silhouette was unmistakably American. "Gentlemen," Mayer began, his voice carrying across the assembled pilots, "I have called you here because too many of our comrades are dying in ignorance. You have all engaged these American bombers, but few of you have seen one up close, and none of you have seen them from the inside. Today, that changes." For the next 3 hours, Mayer led the fighter pilots through a detailed tour of the B-17. They examined each gun position, noting fields of fire and blind spots. They studied the armor plating protecting critical systems and crew positions. They inspected the self-sealing fuel tanks and redundant control systems. Most importantly, they entered the aircraft and observed the combat environment from the American gunner's perspective, gaining critical insight into when and how they became visible targets during attack runs. "From now on," Mayer concluded, "no pilot under my command attacks these bombers without understanding precisely what he faces. The frontal attack doctrine has cost us too many irreplaceable men. We will adapt, or we will perish." This hands-on tactical education, repeated at fighter bases across the Reich through the autumn of 1943, represented the most immediate practical application of the Rechlin test findings. The captured B-17 became not just a technical curiosity, but a teaching tool that potentially saved hundreds of Luftwaffe pilots from fatal tactical errors. The lessons derived from the captured bomber extended beyond German fighters to influence other aspects of Reich air defense. The demonstrated effectiveness of the B-17's defensive armament accelerated development of the Focke-Wulf Ta 152, a heavily armed interceptor specifically designed to attack bomber formations from beyond the range of their defensive guns. The understanding of the bomber's vulnerability to cannon fire, as opposed to machine guns, led to increased production of fighters armed with 30mm cannon, rather than the standard 20mm weapons. Most significantly, the evidence of American industrial capacity revealed by the B-17 program prompted a renewed emphasis on Germany's wonder weapons, particularly rocket and jet technology, as the only viable counter to overwhelming Allied material superiority. The Me-262 jet fighter and Me-163 rocket interceptor programs received increased priority following the Rechlin evaluations, reflecting a desperate search for qualitative advantages that might offset the quantitative disparity. By late autumn 1943, the strategic implications of the captured B-17 findings were becoming evident in broader German military planning. At a November High Command conference attended by both Luftwaffe and Wehrmacht leadership, General Oberst Alfred Jodl, chief of the operations staff, incorporated the air defense assessment into a comprehensive strategic review. The American bombing campaign represents more than a tactical challenge, Jodl noted. It is the visible manifestation of industrial capacity that now exceeds our own by margins that grow wider each month. The same factories producing these bombers are simultaneously manufacturing tanks, artillery, ships, and all manner of war material in quantities we cannot match. We must recognize that time and resources increasingly favor our enemies. This sobering assessment, prompted in significant part by insights gained from the captured B-17, marked a crucial inflection point in German strategic thinking. The fantasy of victory was giving way to the mathematics of inevitable defeat, calculated in production figures, resource availability, and industrial capacity rather than battlefield heroics or tactical brilliance. For the American bomber crews continuing to fly missions against German targets, the enemy's evolving response to their formations became evident through changing attack patterns. By late 1943, Luftwaffe fighters were employing new tactics, attacking in larger, more concentrated formations, favoring stern approaches rather than head-on passes, and increasingly using standoff weapons like air-to-air rockets. Captain Robert Morgan, pilot of the famous B-17 Memphis Belle, and one of the first to complete a 25-mission tour, observed this tactical evolution. When we started flying missions in 1942, the German fighters came at us from all angles, often singly or in pairs. By 1943, they had become much more methodical, attacking in larger groups, focusing on specific parts of the formation, and seeming to know exactly where our defensive coverage was weakest. It was clear they were learning and adapting. What Morgan and his fellow airmen could not know was the extent to which their enemy's adaptation had been informed by the captured Wulfe Hound and its revealing test flights over Rechlin. The intelligence gleaned from those tests had fundamentally altered the air war, not enough to reverse the tide of American bombing, but sufficient to make each mission increasingly costly for both sides. October 8, 1943. 25,000 feet above Bremen, Germany. The sky was filled with aluminum as more than 250 B-17 flying fortresses approached their target, the vital Focke-Wulf aircraft factory. Alongside them flew 142 P-47 Thunderbolt fighters, providing escort to the edge of their range. In the cockpit of a Messerschmitt Bf-109G, Hauptmann Hans-Joachim Marseille gripped his control stick as he led 64 fighters of Jagdgeschwader 27 on an intercept course. Marseille had studied the Rechlin reports on the captured B-17 exhaustively. He understood the bomber's defensive armament, its vulnerabilities, and its strengths better than almost any Luftwaffe pilot. Yet intellectual understanding was one thing. The reality of facing hundreds of these machines in combat formation was quite another. Achtung, feindliche Bomber voraus, Marseille called over the radio. Enemy bombers ahead. Remember the new tactics. No frontal attacks. Gruppe 1 and 2. Prepare for high side pass with 20-degree deflection. Gruppe 3 and 4. Low side attack after our first pass draws their fire. The German fighters accelerated toward the bomber formation, climbing to gain altitude advantage for the attack. Marseille's new tactics, directly informed by the Rechlin tests, called for coordinated strikes from multiple angles, avoiding the deadly frontal cone of fire that had claimed so many Luftwaffe pilots in previous months. As his fighter closed to 800 meters from the nearest B-17, Marseille could see the ominous barrels of 50-caliber machine guns tracking his approach. He broke right, initiating the deflection attack pattern, presenting a difficult target while bringing his own cannons to bear on the bomber's right wing and engines. 63 other Messerschmitts followed his lead, executing the carefully rehearsed attack sequence. The sky erupted in a storm of tracer fire. Despite their coordinated approach, the sheer volume of defensive fire from the bomber formation was overwhelming. Marseille watched in horror as 4 of his pilots fell in the initial exchange, their fighters erupting in flames or spiraling away, trailing smoke. The mathematical reality of American firepower was being demonstrated in the most brutal terms. What Marseille and his fellow pilots experienced that day was the practical application of what the Rechlin tests had revealed. A single B-17 was a formidable opponent. Hundreds in formation created an almost impenetrable defensive network. The captured bomber had provided technical insight, but it could not fully convey the psychological impact of facing industrial warfare on this scale. After 2 attack passes, the Luftwaffe formation withdrew, having destroyed 11 B-17s at the cost of 17 of their own irreplaceable aircraft and pilots. It was an exchange rate that spelled doom if continued, exactly as the Rechlin evaluation had predicted. That evening, Marseille wrote in his operational journal, "Today we implemented the new tactics derived from our study of the captured fortress. They are marginally more effective, but the fundamental problem remains unsolved. When facing these bombers in the numbers they now deploy, mathematical probability guarantees our losses will exceed our successes. We are not merely fighting American airmen. We are fighting American factories." This realization that German pilots were battling not just American bombers, but America's vast industrial capacity, represents the critical turning point in the air war over Europe. The test flights of the captured B-17 had provided technical data, but the true revelation came when German leadership grasped the production mathematics behind those technical specifications. The Rechlin Test Center compiled comprehensive data on the B-17's construction, noting that each bomber contained nearly 11,000 pounds of aluminum, 2,800 pounds of steel, and 1,500 pounds of copper, critical materials that Germany increasingly struggled to obtain. American industry, by contrast, enjoyed abundant access to these resources, allowing Boeing to complete a new B-17 every 90 minutes by late 1943. Generalleutnant Adolf Galland, who had witnessed parts of the Rechlin testing program, later wrote, "The captured flying fortress revealed more than technical secrets. It exposed the unbridgeable gap between German and American industrial capacity. While we celebrated shooting down 10 bombers, their factories had built 30 new ones. The fundamental equation of modern warfare was becoming clear. Industrial output ultimately matters more than tactical brilliance or individual heroism." This understanding transformed German strategic planning in the final 18 months of the war. As early as December 1943, Albert Speer, Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production, incorporated the lessons from the captured B-17 into his industrial planning. In a memorandum to Hitler, he noted, "The American bomber program demonstrates production efficiency we cannot match under current conditions. They have adopted mass production techniques across their entire war industry, while we continue to rely on traditional manufacturing methods that prioritize quality over quantity. The mathematical outcome of this disparity is inevitable unless we can deploy technological countermeasures that nullify their numerical advantage. This desperate search for technological countermeasures to offset American industrial superiority led directly to the acceleration of Germany's most advanced weapons programs. The Me-262 jet fighter, the V-1 flying bomb, the V-2 rocket, all received increased priority following the strategic reassessment prompted partly by the captured B-17 evaluation. These wonder weapons represented Germany's final hope of overcoming the mathematical certainty of defeat by conventional means. The Boeing plant in Seattle, Washington, provided the most dramatic illustration of this production disparity. By early 1944, this single facility was producing over 16 B-17s daily, more aircraft than most Luftwaffe fighter squadrons had in their entire inventory. The plant employed 30,000 workers, many of them women, working around the clock in 3 shifts. German intelligence reports on American production figures were initially dismissed as exaggeration until the captured B-17 provided tangible evidence of American manufacturing capability. For the Luftwaffe pilots continuing to oppose the American bombing campaign, the implications were increasingly clear. Major Werner Mulders, a fighter ace with 115 victories who had studied the Rechlin reports extensively, briefed his squadron in January 1944. "We must abandon any illusion that we can defeat the American air offensive through attrition. Their production capacity exceeds our ability to destroy their aircraft. Each of you must survive to fight repeatedly. Your experience and skill are irreplaceable, while they can replace their losses weekly. This is no longer a battle of aircraft against aircraft, but of our limited resources against their unlimited production." The psychological impact on German pilots was profound. Oberleutnant Franz Stiegler, who had participated in the Rechlin evaluation flights, later recalled, "After seeing the B-17's construction and understanding how many were being produced, something changed in our perception of the air war. Before, we believed victory was possible through superior training and tactics. After, we understood that no amount of individual brilliance could overcome the industrial mathematics we faced." This realization contributed to a gradual erosion of morale among Luftwaffe units tasked with bomber interception, a factor as damaging as physical losses. Combat reports increasingly noted pilots breaking off attacks earlier, prioritizing survival over victory as the mathematical futility of their mission became apparent. Psychological warfare had been achieved not through propaganda, but through production statistics made tangible by the captured bomber. By spring 1944, the strategic implications of the Rechlin findings had permeated the highest levels of German military planning. At a March High Command conference, Generalfeldmarschall Wilhelm Keitel, Chief of the Armed Forces High Command, referenced the ongoing air defense crisis. "The American bombing campaign represents more than a tactical challenge to our air defenses. It demonstrates industrial capacity that will soon manifest on the ground in Normandy and beyond. We face not merely bomber formations, but the physical embodiment of production superiority that will eventually appear as tanks, artillery, and infantry equipment in quantities we cannot match." This recognition that the B-17s were merely the visible vanguard of American industrial might represented the true strategic insight gained from the captured bomber program. The aircraft itself had revealed technical capabilities. Its production context had revealed the inevitability of Germany's defeat. As 1944 progressed, the mathematical projections made after the Rechlin tests proved grimly accurate. American aircraft production continued to accelerate, reaching a peak of 9,600 bombers and 9,000 fighters in that year alone, figures that exceeded Germany's entire cumulative wartime production. The 8th Air Force expanded from 500 operational aircraft in mid-1943 to over 2,000 by late 1944. Against this industrial onslaught, German technological innovations proved insufficient. The Me-262 jet fighter, capable of speeds 100 miles per hour faster than any Allied aircraft, began operations in July 1944. Yet, production never exceeded 200 aircraft monthly, against American monthly production of over 1,500 fighters. Once again, the mathematics of industrial capacity proved decisive. The final vindication of the Rechlin assessment came during the Battle of Berlin in March 1944, when American bombers struck the German capital for the first time with heavy fighter escort, a capability that Luftwaffe planners had previously considered impossible due to range limitations. The appearance of P-51 Mustangs over Berlin, made possible by American-designed drop tanks, represented yet another demonstration of innovative mass production overcoming technical limitations. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, who had initially dismissed the implications of the Rechlin reports, reportedly remarked upon hearing of Mustangs over Berlin, "When I saw American fighters over the Reich capital, I knew the war was lost. They have solved through industrial means what we thought was a fundamental constraint of physics." For the American air crews who continued to fly missions against German targets throughout 1944, the evolving German response to their formations revealed the impact of the captured B-17 intelligence. Luftwaffe attacks became increasingly sophisticated, employing rockets, air-to-air bombs, and concentrated fighter formations specifically targeting formation edges and trailing aircraft. All tactics developed from the Rechlin findings. Colonel Curtis LeMay, commander of the 3rd Air Division, noted this tactical evolution in an April 1944 assessment. "The enemy has clearly developed a sophisticated understanding of our defensive formations and equipment capabilities. Their attacks now systematically probe for weaknesses with a precision that suggests detailed knowledge of our aircraft. Despite this, our numerical superiority continues to increase, allowing us to absorb losses that would cripple a less industrially capable force." This observation captured the essential truth revealed by the captured B-17. Technical knowledge alone could not overcome industrial disparity. The Luftwaffe had learned how to fight B-17 formations more effectively, but they could not overcome the mathematical reality of American production capacity. As Allied forces secured air superiority following the D-Day landings in June 1944, the fate of the captured Wulfe Hound itself became a footnote to history. The aircraft remained at Rechlin until April 1945, when advancing Soviet forces approached the test center. Rather than allow the modified bomber to fall into Soviet hands, Luftwaffe personnel destroyed it on the ground, a final act that symbolized the ultimate futility of their technical evaluation program. Understanding the bomber had not enabled them to stop it or its thousands of identical siblings. The strategic assessment prompted by the captured B-17 proved prescient in ways that extended far beyond the air war. The industrial disparity it highlighted manifested across all aspects of the conflict. While Germany produced approximately 47,000 aircraft during the entire war, the United States produced over 300,000. Similar ratios applied to tanks, artillery, naval vessels, and all other categories of war materiel. Werner Baumbach, commandant of KG 200 and directly involved in the B-17 evaluation program, provided perhaps the most insightful post-war assessment. The captured American bomber showed us not merely technical capabilities, but a fundamentally different approach to warfare. The Germans built weapons as craftsmen, emphasizing technical perfection and individual quality. The Americans built weapons as industrialists, prioritizing standardization, simplicity, and overwhelming quantity. In this war of production philosophies, the outcome was determined on assembly lines rather than battlefields. This recognition, that industrial capacity rather than tactical brilliance or technological sophistication would determine the war's outcome, represents the most profound legacy of the captured B-17 program. The bomber had served as a tangible embodiment of American production might, forcing German leadership to confront the mathematical certainty of defeat long before the final battles were fought. For the American strategic bombing campaign, the German evaluation of their captured aircraft represented an unintended success. While the Luftwaffe gained tactical insights that temporarily improved their defensive effectiveness, the program's primary outcome was to convince German leadership of the futility of continued resistance against overwhelming industrial superiority. Some historians argue that this psychological impact ultimately saved lives by contributing to Germany's surrender before total destruction became necessary. The final statistical accounting of the air war provides the clearest validation of the Rechlin assessment. By war's end, American factories had produced over 12,500 B-17 bombers, despite combat losses exceeding 4,500 aircraft. The United States Army Air Forces could sustain casualty rates that would have broken any other air force, because their industrial base could replace losses faster than they occurred, exactly as the captured bomber evaluation had concluded was possible. This mathematical reality, that American industry could sustain otherwise unsustainable losses through superior production capacity, ultimately rendered German tactical adaptations irrelevant. The captured B-17 had revealed not just a formidable aircraft, but an unstoppable industrial system that would inevitably achieve victory through material superiority. General Feldmarschall Erhard Milch, responsible for German aircraft production, offered perhaps the most succinct epitaph for the Luftwaffe's struggle against American industrial might in his post-war interrogation. "We studied their bombers, improved our tactics, deployed our most advanced technology, and trained our pilots to the highest standard. None of it mattered in the end. We were not defeated by American airmen, but by American factory workers. The true decisive front of this war was not in the sky over Germany, but on the assembly lines of Detroit, Seattle, and Los Angeles." The captured B-17's greatest contribution to history may have been this fundamental insight. Modern warfare is ultimately an industrial contest where productive capacity matters more than individual heroism or tactical brilliance. The bomber had embodied this truth, forcing its German evaluators to confront the mathematical certainty of defeat, even as they strove to overcome it through technical innovation and tactical adaptation. The lessons learned from the captured Wulfe Hound thus extend far beyond the technical details of a single aircraft type or the tactical nuances of bomber interception. They speak to the fundamental nature of industrial warfare and the decisive importance of production capacity in determining victory or defeat. In forcing the Luftwaffe to confront this reality, the captured bomber achieved a strategic impact far beyond what its American builders could have anticipated. In the decades following World War II, military planners worldwide incorporated this central lesson into their strategic thinking. The Cold War arms race, with its emphasis on production capacity and industrial mobilization potential, represented the logical extension of the insights gained from the captured B-17 program. Modern military powers came to understand that victory in major conflicts would belong not to the side with the best individual weapons, but to the side that could produce effective weapons in overwhelming quantities. This enduring legacy, the recognition that industrial capacity trumps tactical brilliance in modern warfare, represents the true historical significance of the Luftwaffe's encounter with the captured flying fortress. in forcing German leaders to confront the mathematical certainty of defeat through production statistics made tangible. The bomber accomplished more through its capture than it might have through continued combat operations. As one anonymous Luftwaffe officer wrote in the final Rechlin assessment report, "The B-17 is not merely an aircraft, it is the physical manifestation of America's industrial superiority. Each one we examine tells the same story. We are not fighting individual bombers, but the system that produces them in seemingly limitless quantities." In this sense, our detailed technical evaluation has revealed a truth